This weekend, we got our second Guy Ritchie film in as many months, and he's made some fantastic films, he's made some abysmal films, and everything in between, from interesting misfires to corporate products. So today we're going to stop and rank all 14 Guy Ritchie films from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Share your ranking of all the Guy Ritchie films that you've seen, and if you're up for the challenge, all 14 of his movies. My list isn't the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. With that said, let's get started. Easily in last place is Swept Away. After making back-to-back bangers with Snatch and Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, he goes completely off the rails here and makes one of the worst films ever made. And not in an interesting way. Like, this is a remake, and by the time the movie came out, it was a well-worn path about two opposites that get stranded together and fall in love. It kind of tries to play like a rom-com, but minus the jokes and the romance. Like, the movie's idea of comedy is the guy walks up to Madonna and dumps spaghetti on her head and throws her overboard. And when it comes to the romance, these are two of the most unlikable characters in all of cinematic history. Madonna's character is just a wretched and racist person.
Anthony! It was her rules.
Pee-pee, water, and towel. Understand?
Only made worse by Madonna's character. And then when we get to the island and the power dynamics shift and the servant guy is in power, he starts to literally beat her and deprive her of food, and then makes her call him master because she's his slave, and eventually he demands she take her clothes off, and when she starts running away, he forces himself on her until she says yes. That's the scene in this movie.
Wow.
How romantic. This is one of the most catastrophic drops in quality I've ever seen from one movie to the next. It's important to note, if you don't know, the reason Madonna stars in this movie is because she was married to Guy Ritchie at the time, and she will tie into our discussion of the movie Revolver. Speaking of Revolver, number 13, Revolver. Here, Guy Ritchie returns to the gangster genre, this time with Jason Statham in the lead and with legendary filmmaker Luc Besson producing. What could possibly go wrong? Apparently a whole lot. Now, like Swept Away, this is a very bad movie, but unlike Swept Away, this is an interesting bad movie. The movie's a bit like if you took Snatch and took out all the humor, memorable dialogue, and interesting characters and replaced it with metaphors and allegory for the Kabbalan view of the ego as well as its numeric system. And if that sounds like mumbo jumbo to you, it's because it is, just like the movie itself, except with more chess.
We just put you to war with the only enemy that ever existed. And you think he's your best friend.
And they will protect their best friend.
And I'm not joking, the movie ends, the credits start rolling, and then there's footage of psychotherapists discussing the way the ego deceives us.
Is that the ego hides in the last place if you'd ever look. Within itself.
It disguises its thoughts as your thoughts. You think it's you.
Wow. That was weird.
And if you're wondering why Guy Ritchie decided to inject Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, into a gangster movie, that's where Madonna comes back into our story. She was into Kabbalah, introduced it to her then husband Guy Ritchie, who decided to introduce it to all of us via a gangster movie. And maybe it would have worked with a more streamlined narrative and style, but the intercutting here is just so excessive, you can't follow what's taking place. You'll have two people talking, intercut with Jason Statham's inner monologue, intercut with him playing putt-putt with people, intercut with him playing chess. And so there's so much stuff going on that you can't follow what's real or not. Or to put it more succinctly, it's an incomprehensible dumpster fire. Now, the big standout here, there is a cool action sequence where Mark Strong takes out a room full of people. It is hyper stylized, maybe too stylized, but at least it's cool, different, and new. Next up, Sherlock Holmes, A Game of Shadows. For me, the novelty of Guy Ritchie directing a Sherlock Holmes movie has faded, and we're left with just an exhausting experience. Here, it just feels like Guy Ritchie is a lot more interested in the action sequences than the Sherlock Holmes aspect of this Sherlock Holmes film. In particular, it feels very much to me like Guy Ritchie was interested in directing a period piece spy film rather than a Sherlock Holmes mystery.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
In which case, when you get this film, there's globe-trotting, there's terrorists, there's a conspiracy, there's all sorts of gigantic action set pieces, there's disguises, there's even technology to swap people's faces in order for assassins to be able to sneak in and kill people. All of that feels like the spy genre, which Guy Ritchie has gone on to make multiple spy films since this movie. It doesn't feel like pure Sherlock Holmes, or at least not like Sherlock Holmes is the primary concern here. And so even when it comes to kind of the central mystery, it's not something that the audience could piece together themselves. The mystery involves entirely withholding information from the audience, so when you get to the big reveal moments, it tells us what was really going on rather than having a mystery that we could solve with Holmes himself. So a movie to me that I've never really been able to get into, and it feels like entirely style over substance and missing the point of the actual property being adapted. Number 11, King Arthur, The Legend of the Sword. For me, this is a watchable misfire. I don't feel like Guy Ritchie's unique bag of tricks serves this particular property all that well, in which case, whenever the Guy Ritchieisms, the slow-mo, the recaps, the witty banter come into play, it felt forced and unnatural.
You've made a huge mistake.
And when the story kind of plays out a little bit more straightforward, I kind of started getting more and more invested into the movie, in which case the director himself and what he uniquely brings to projects turned out to be more of a liability for this particular film than an asset. Likewise, I felt it got the mix of kind of fantasy to more grounded things just kind of wrong. It kicks off with this very fantasy heavy introduction. It has all of these fantasy elements in the climax involving Excalibur, which itself was a little bit over the top and felt like we're going into God mode a little bit too much. But the middle, pretty light on a lot of kind of the magic elements. So I feel like the mix was just kind of wrong there. All that to say, it's still fun enough, it's enjoyable enough, it's watchable enough, but it felt like just kind of a mismatch of director to project, wrong amount of like, let's make it grounded, but we still want to have magic in it. So, you know, maybe a couple more passes on the script and someone besides Ritchie directing it, and this could have been better. Kicking off our top 10, RocknRolla. After a pair of absolute disasters, Guy Ritchie returns to the genre which made him famous, and some of the magic just isn't quite there. As always, fantastic cast. The lead here is Gerard Butler, fresh off 300. You have a pre-movie star, Tom Hardy, thrown into the mix, and so many other charismatic, fun actors in here. But as great as the cast is, I don't feel like the characters themselves are as fun as the characters in Snatch and Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. It kind of feels like Guy Ritchie was trying to return to the genre, but do something a little bit more mature, less over the top, less hyper stylization, not quite as much humor and witty banter, at least not as in your face. But he doesn't have something to replace the hyper stylization or the humor with, hyper humor banter type stuff with. And so you just have a movie that just feels like it's holding back the entire time. Feels muted. So it's not bad. It's a nice return to form compared to what he just did, but it feels like a hollow version of what he's done before. It feels like someone else trying to make a Guy Ritchie movie rather than Guy Ritchie making another great Guy Ritchie movie. And I feel like he did a much better job 10 years later with The Gentleman, doing what he's trying to do here. Number 9, Sherlock Holmes. And this is probably my Guy Ritchie hot take, but I've never been as crazy about this film as a lot of other people are. On paper, I feel like I should love this movie because big Guy Ritchie fan, enjoy Sherlock Holmes. Of course, Robert Downey Jr. is an absolute legend. Jude Law is fantastic. So smash all those together. I always feel like I should enjoy this movie more than I actually do.
Watson, you have the grand gift of silence. Makes you quite invaluable as a companion.
And there's a bunch of things in here that are really cool, like applying Guy Ritchie's style to what Sherlock Holmes's brain would do in an action sequence. That's interesting, fresh, and even as you see it, it's such a new way to do a fight sequence that we haven't seen before and we haven't really seen since. And there's a number of those things that I really enjoy about the movie. And at the same time, I feel like it kind of misses what you really want out of a Sherlock Holmes story. It gets so lost in all the flash, the razzle-dazzle, the Guy Ritchie-isms, the cool action set pieces, that you never really build the intrigue when it comes to the mystery. And even kind of built into it is Lord Blackwood actually magical? The audience knows he's not. And so when you get to the big reveals of how he pulled off all of his magic, and it turns out it wasn't magic after all, it doesn't have any payoff because we already knew that was kind of where this was all headed from the get-go. So there's just several things like that where I wish there was a way to really do a great Sherlock, or maybe maybe they'll do Sherlock Holmes 3 and it'll capture this, but to get a great Sherlock Holmes mystery and story, but with the Guy Ritchie-isms and style. And I don't feel like that's what this is. This is Guy Ritchie-isms with kind of a Sherlock Holmes skin. Style over substance. But to be very clear, I like this movie. I would give it like a B. It's an enjoyable film. I just have never liked it as much as I feel like I should. Then we have The Man From U.N.C.L.E. Here, the man who was Superman teams up with the man who was almost Batman and who might be in real life a Hannibal Lecter wannabe. Ooh. Team up to be competing spies who have a little bit of a bromance as the movie goes along. And much like Sherlock Holmes, this is a movie that I enjoy, I think is good and I have fun with, but I never enjoy it quite as much as I want to. The dialogue is energetic. The characters are lively. There's plenty of action sequences with all the Guy Ritchie isms and energy that you want. So there's so much stuff here that I really enjoy that every time I watch it, I feel like I'm going to like it just a little bit more than I actually do. Some of that is there's just some odd choices. There's times where they set up an action sequence and then skip over it. Weird choice. And other times I enjoy the characters, the action, the dialogue, the aesthetic more than I get invested in the actual story itself. And maybe that's one of the issues that certain Guy Ritchie films have, is that because he has such a distinct style with his visually as well as his dialogue, with his characters, you can enjoy that while not caring too much about the actual plot itself. And I feel that's a little bit what I have happened with this movie. Number 7, Operation Fortune, the first of 2 Guy Ritchie films to come out in 2023. This movie was supposed to come out a year ago. They put out trailers and then it just didn't happen. I mean, this did not have a release date until a week or 2 before it was released, and they dropped it the same day as Creed 3, which felt like they just wanted to get it out before they got to the next one, and they didn't care about how it performed. It was very, very weird. And I was wondering if that meant the movie was going to be awful. And it's not at all. I had a really good time with this movie. It's a little bit like Guy Ritchie's spin on Mission Impossible and James Bond mashed together, but with Guy Ritchie lively characters. And so, as always, the cast is stacked. The characters pop as usual. They're fun. They're interesting. There's plenty of laughs. There's plenty of action. There's plenty of twists and turns. But oddly enough, as a Guy Ritchie movie, stylistically, it feels fairly muted. So I've kind of criticized a few of the last few movies on here of being style over substance, where there's a few too many Guy Ritchie-isms. And then when you get to this movie, it's almost the opposite. I feel like it needed more Guy Ritchie-isms. It needed to do more of kind of the hyper editing, the back and forth timeline stuff. This movie would have been better with more of that. So some average between the ones right before this that was too much and this one right here where it's a little bit too little. I think you might find the perfect spot in here.
That's a yes. You weren't seen by anyone? Yes. Or a yes, you were seen by someone? Yes.
In which case, when you put it all together, you get a movie that, for me, was very easy to watch, very fun time at the movies, while not necessarily standing out and popping as much as it might have if Guy Ritchie put a little bit more of himself into it. It felt like he was intentionally playing it safe with this one to play to a wider audience. And then for some reason, they hardly released it to a wide audience. This is a strange movie. I would love to know what went on behind the scenes with the delays and everything and why it was almost like they tried to hide its release. Very strange. Fun movie. If you like spy movies and you like Guy Ritchie, it's worth checking out. Number 6, Aladdin. And as a point of reference, here on out, I think these are all very good movies. I would give this a B+. I think this might be the best of the Disney live action remakes, and it is an example of how to do them right and which properties translate well into live action. So why do I think that this is one of the better Disney live action remakes? First off, I'm biased. This is the one that my kids rewatched the most. When I was growing up, I was the perfect age for when Aladdin came out. I had the soundtrack. I saw it a zillion times. Jump forward 30 years. My kids were the perfect age for the Disney live action remake, and they've watched the remake many more times. So I'm biased that I enjoyed it myself, but then as a father, it's a movie that my kids have watched on loop that doesn't drive me crazy. But from there, I think just inherently Aladdin translates well into live action because it is this adventure where the lead characters are humans, in which case chases, action set pieces, they translate well into live action. Other thing, they found the perfect person to play the genie, where Robin Williams is one of the most iconic voice castings of all time as the genie. Who is someone that is just as charismatic, funny, and energetic, but in a totally different way? Will Smith. This guy absolutely slaps as the genie. Sorry, I couldn't resist. But he's great. He's the perfect person to play a live-action genie in the year 2019.
I stand by my oath, loyalty to wishes 3. I'm kidding. Watch this.
And then they just added a few kind of plot points in there that I think appropriately fleshed a few details out, in which case it's just a great companion to the original that does some things different while being essentially the same story. So for me, of the Disney live action remakes, I totally get why people are burned out on them and don't like them very much. I think this is one of the good ones. In 5th place, Wrath of Man, and this is very much my kind of film. It's a tense blend of heist and revenge thriller, which that is right up my alley. I thoroughly enjoy Jason Statham in this kind of role. And what's interesting about it is that it doesn't use most of the tools in Guy Ritchie's bag of tricks. It doesn't have humor. It doesn't have the lively, charismatic, over-the-top characters. No, it plays it straight, but it uses some of his other bags of tricks like messing around with the timeline to tell its story to maximum effect. But even when it does that, it doesn't do it the way other Guy Ritchie films have done that. It plays very much like chapters where you follow one branch of the story and then it leaves you on a note where you're like, what on earth does that mean? And then it tells you another branch of the story where we go back in time and follow other characters, and we go to another branch, follow something else. And if you told the story in order, it would be fairly simple in the way that it plays out. But by messing with the timeline, it adds just enough intrigue and mystery into things to add an extra layer to give the story its kind of maximum effect. So as you move into the end, you have all these intersecting storylines. And When it comes to the action, you're at the edge of your seat. You feel the danger. You care about what's taking place. Even though you're not necessarily rooting for any of the characters, you're invested in the narrative that's taking place. And so for me, I thoroughly enjoyed this film when I first saw it a few years back. And I was wondering, would it still work with me when I rewatched it, knowing how it would play out when I watched it a month ago? It absolutely held up for me, and it's something different from Guy Ritchie, but still highly effective. Number 4, The Covenant, the latest Guy Ritchie film. And like Wrath of Man, it's Ritchie making a more mature film that's very intense and doesn't use his classic bag of tricks. Once again, very little humor, and these are not lively, over-the-top characters. These are very much grounded, real-world characters. All that to say, this is Guy Ritchie's war movie, but it's more of a soldier movie. It's not a war movie in the classic sense of being about the soldiers on their mission to take out the bad guys or those people over there. It's not about the horrors of war. It's about the experiences of the people on the ground and the bond between them, or the covenant between them, where as you kind of follow through the first act, you see kind of a certain mutual respect forming between Jake Gyllenhaal's character and the interpreter. And then as the real body of the film plays out, it's a movie all about these men of deep convictions trying to do the right thing to serve the people that they were in combat with, and the duty or the loyalty they have to each other. And it plays really well for people that are into those types of stories, which I am one of those people. So I thoroughly enjoyed this film. I got very invested into the first half of the movie as the interpreter is going to such great lengths to save Jake Gyllenhaal's character. And even the way that it's set up, it's not like they're established to be best buds that have a personal friendship. It's not that. It's very much a sense of duty, doing the right things because of what he's trying to accomplish in this greater sense. And then as you move into the back half of the film, Gyllenhaal feels obligated to save this man that saved him, no matter the cost. There's something very compelling about people that have that level of conviction and self-sacrifice. If you're into war films, soldier films, absolutely check this one out. Real quick, before I give you my top 3, remember to join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of all 14 Guy Ritchie films, or at least as many as you've seen. Also, if you enjoyed this video, I've done a ton of other director rankings. Spielberg, Nolan, Fincher, Shyamalan, so many more. You can check them out in this playlist somewhere around here when this video is over with. In third, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, a British spin on Tarantino's Cool Gangsters, but without ever feeling like it's actually Tarantino. This is distinctly Guy Ritchie's style when it comes to the visuals, the banter, the characters. All of it has such a unique vibe to it and such an assured style as his directorial debut. The movie at its core is kind of this comedy of errors where Ritchie crafts this layered, complex narrative of all these different characters, all these different plot lines, subplot lines that intertwine together and pay off so well in the final 10 minutes. And it's a movie that kind of demands a second viewing to even pick up on all the different ways that the plot lines merge together. And there's just enough where things are out of order where you can see that, and when you rewatch it and pick up on all the things. Also, it's so specifically regional, where they weren't afraid to put in a bunch of Cockney rhyming slang.
He then orders an Aristotle of the most ping-pong tiddly in the nuclear sub and switches back to his footer. That's fucking it, says the geezer.
Where it wasn't designed to appeal or cater to everyone. It wanted to represent this community where it was taking place, and they did things to make it so you could pick up on what was happening enough to follow the story. And also, it's a movie that just launched so many careers. Obviously, Guy Ritchie's first film, but also Matthew Vaughn was one of the producers on the film. He goes on to direct Kick-Ass, First Class, Kingsman movies. His start kind of with this movie. Jason Statham, his first big acting role. Vinnie Jones, one of his first big acting roles. Even like Dexter Fletcher, one of the guys in this graphic right here, one of the actors in this movie, he went on to direct Rocket Man. And then this weekend, a movie came out called Ghosted, starring Chris Evans and Ana de Armas. He's the director of it. He's right there in that poster. So much talent came out of this movie. And on a personal note, this along with Snatch were pivotal in kind of me developing as a film lover outside of just blockbusters. Snatch came out at the perfect time for me to discover it, hear about this other movie, and kind of started kind of this deep dive into film because of this movie. So Guy Ritchie is one of those directors that has always kind of had a special place in my heart, despite the fact that his career went on some weird paths. Our runner-up, The Gentleman. After a decade, Guy Ritchie returned to the genre, which made him famous, and by now he was a well-established veteran director, much older in life, and I feel like you're able to get all of the best of Guy Ritchie as a mature filmmaker in this movie. You have all the lively characters that you want from a Guy Ritchie gangster film. You have all the twists, turns, convoluted storytelling, and in this context, convoluted is a compliment, but also it just feels like it's got a bit more maturity to it in the nature of the characters, where the characters are at in life, with Matthew McConaughey's character being married and what that entails for him and his journey. It just has a little bit more to it, and it represents a storyteller that's older, has more maturity, has more insight on life, but doing that genre which made him famous in the first place.
His name is Fahak, but spelled with a PH, so it sounds like Fahak. Please!
And so it's got all the things that I loved about Snatch, Lock, Stock, Two Smoking Barrels, but from someone at a very different place in life. And so just a very nice return to what I love about Guy Ritchie that doesn't feel like a rehash of those movies. It doesn't feel like a 50-year-old man trying to reclaim his youth. It feels like him rediscovering his love for a genre. And as someone who, as I just told you, those movies meant so much to me, who myself was about 40 years old when this movie came out, it was just so wonderful to kind of also explore it as an older person myself. But coming in first place, Snatch. This movie takes everything that I loved and praised about Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and gives it a bigger budget, a bigger story, more stars, and just overall a more refined, polished version of it. In a lot of ways, it's kind of rehashing what worked about Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, but not in a bad way. In a way that makes Lock, Stock feel like the demo version and Snatch feel like the finished product. But the demo was already awesome, so it's just the best version of this thing that he'd been working on. You get some fantastic characters in one of Brad Pitt's most like standout iconic roles, at least for me.
You look like a boxer.
And then this is just kind of peak Guy Ritchie energetic style when it comes to the visuals, the editing style, the overly convoluted, layered storytelling. Once again, that's a compliment in this context. So much so that over 20 years later, last year when Bullet Train came out, so many reviews compared Bullet Train to Snatch, saying Bullet Train is Snatch as an action movie on a train, because it made a mark and was so distinct, so stylish, so memorable to an entire generation of people. And also, like Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, it all kind of crescendos into this great finale where all the plot lines merge together in such a fun, satisfying way. So Snatch comes in at number 1. If you enjoyed this video, remember I've got more like it right over there in that playlist. I've talked about Fincher's films, Nolan's, Spielberg, and so many more. It's right over there. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.